They didn't save me a seat beside my son. That's the first thing I noticed, standing near the back of the chapel, while people in tailored suits and pastel dresses filled rows meant for family. I hovered near the edge like a stranger at someone else's wedding, not the mother of the groom. There was no corsage on my wrist, no special mention, no photograph with the newlyweds. Just a smile from a wedding planner who called me ma'am like I was someone's aunt who wandered in off the street. The ceremony itself was lovely, I suppose. The kind of polished, Pinterest-inspired affair Emily would have loved to curate. Soft violin music, white pumpkins lining the aisle, vows that sounded rehearsed in a mirror. But what I remember most was the absence. Not of decoration or charm, but of presence mine. Dylan didn't look back once. When they toasted family, I raised my glass out of politeness. No one clinked back. It was as if I was furniture, a quiet fixture. I've lived through enough Midwestern winters to learn how to sit through cold things. I did it again that day. What I didn't expect came 2 nights later. Dylan invited me to dinner downtown, just the two of us. He smiled at first, too tightly, and said he was glad I came. Then he slid a folder across the table and told me it was just a formality. Power of attorney. Access to all my property. In the event of illness. Or death. So, we don't have to worry, he said. I didn't speak. I stared at the papers. And then I just said I'd think about it. But I already knew my answer. Because sometimes silence is a no. And sometimes, that's the only word you need. I didn't sleep the night he handed me those papers. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun shadows across the plaster. The hum of it used to soothe me back when Peter was alive and we'd drift off to its rhythm. But that night, it felt like a warning bell. Quiet, repetitive, unignorable. In the morning, I went to the basement. I told myself I was just looking for something to do. Something to keep my hands busy and my mind off the ache blooming behind my ribs. The basement was cluttered with decades of living. Boxes of library books I never returned, old paint cans, Peter's tools, a rocking horse Dylan hadn't touched since he was 6. And in the far corner, against the cinder block wall, was the old cedar trunk. Peter's trunk. He always kept it locked. Said it was just files, boring engineering stuff. I never questioned it. He was a private man. But after he passed, the key had been on his nightstand, tucked behind a watch he hadn't worn in years. I opened it for the first time that morning. Inside were folders. Neatly labeled, of course, he was that kind of man. Retirement papers. Insurance. A worn envelope addressed in his handwriting. For Margaret. Only if you need it. I read the letter sitting on the basement floor. He'd set up a trust. Years ago, after a quiet conversation he'd once had with Dylan that left him uneasy. He hadn't told me because he didn't want me to worry. But he'd left everything in place, bank accounts, a legal contact, even instructions. Not because I don't trust him, he wrote, but because I trust you more. I cried for the first time in months. Not out of grief, not even out of anger, but because I realized Peter had seen it coming and had still tried to leave me with dignity. He showed up 3 days later. No warning, no call. Just his car pulling into my gravel driveway like he still had a key to my life. It was early afternoon, unseasonably warm for October. The leaves were brittle and orange, crunching under his polished shoes as he walked up to the porch. He knocked twice, then once more like he was impatient with me for making him stand there. I let him in. That was my mistake. He sat at the kitchen table like he had when he was a teenager, arms crossed, face hard. But the boy I raised had disappeared under the tailored shirt and impatience. Dylan didn't even ask how I was. He got right to it. He said he was concerned that I might be getting forgetful, that it would be safer for me if he could manage things. Just in case. This isn't about control, he said. It's about protecting you. But it felt like theft, spoken slowly and dressed in concern. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. The rehearsed concern, the borrowed phrases. Probably words he and Emily practiced over dinner. The more he talked, the more distance I felt. Like I was fading in his eyes into something less than human, just a checkbook with a heartbeat. When he pushed the papers toward me again, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I didn't cry. I simply said nothing. The silence hung heavy. He waited, then scoffed, then stood. If something happens to you, he said at the door, don't expect me to drop everything. And I didn't answer. Because that was the moment I knew. He already had. The next morning, I poured my coffee into a travel mug, tied my hair back, and drove into town. It wasn't rage. I wasn't slamming doors or crying into steering wheels. What I felt was something colder, cleaner. A line drawn in the frost on a window pane. I wasn't mourning a loss anymore. I was making a choice. I started with the bank. A quiet branch office where the teller still remembered Peter's name and asked how my hydrangeas were doing. I closed a joint account Dylan didn't even know he was still listed on. Opened a new one under the trust Peter had created. Shifted savings. Redirected statements. Then I went to the courthouse. Small, red-bricked, always smelling faintly of printer toner and floor wax. I updated my power of attorney, my will, my emergency contacts. I crossed Dylan's name off the forms without flinching. I thought I might feel guilty. Instead, I felt awake. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. Bought myself tulips and peanut brittle. Stood in line behind a young mother with a screaming toddler and didn't mind one bit. Back at the house, I took down the framed photo of Dylan in his cap and gown. Not in anger, just because I didn't need the reminder anymore. I wasn't erasing him. I was just refusing to let him be the center of my life anymore. A week later, I packed a weekend bag and left. I didn't tell anyone, not that there was anyone left to tell. I filled a thermos, grabbed Peter's old flannel from the back of the closet, and got in the car. The sky was the color of dishwater, low clouds pressing against the flat Indiana horizon. Cornfields blurred past my window, stalks stripped and yellowed, brittle as memory. Peter and I had always talked about retiring at the lake. We'd bought the cabin on a whim 15 years ago, cheap and half-rotten, but near Lake Michigan. He fixed it up every summer, one nail at a time. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I didn't cry when I saw it again. I expected it to feel haunted. Instead, it felt like quiet, like a book left open on a nightstand, waiting. The shutters were crooked, and a raccoon had clearly made the deck its home, but the roof was holding and the door still opened with the old brass key. Inside, everything smelled of dust and pine. The couch sagged in the middle. There was still a chipped mug on the shelf that said, "Best Dad." I wrapped my hands around it and let myself remember, not the death, but the living. That first night, I lit a fire and sat with my feet up. The wind off the lake groaned through the trees like a warning, or maybe a welcome. I didn't know how long I'd stay. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was arriving. Each morning, I walked to the water. It wasn't far, just a narrow footpath through pale grass and birch trees peeling like old wallpaper. The lake greeted me with silence. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that listens. Even the gulls held their breath. I sat on a weather-worn bench Peter had built from leftover decking. It leaned slightly to one side, like it never decided how to carry weight. I understood that feeling. The wind off Lake Michigan was sharp, slicing through my sleeves and waking up pieces of me I hadn't felt in years. There's something about cold that strips away pretense. It reminds you what matters. I thought of Dylan, of the way his eyes had hardened when I said nothing. I thought of all the years I gave, without keeping receipts. But most of all, I thought of Peter. His laugh when he burned pancakes. His silence when I needed space. The way he never asked me to be small to make room for him. He was never perfect. But he was real. Grief is funny. You think it softens with time, and maybe it does. But in that moment, sitting on a crooked bench beside a gray lake under a paper sky, I didn't miss Peter less. I just missed myself less. Something in me was returning, slowly, like thawing earth. And I decided I'd stay a little longer. The cabin didn't have internet, which at first felt like a punishment. But the quiet started to work on me. I read again real books, not articles or scanned headlines. I ate when I was hungry, not when the clock told me. I didn't check my phone for 3 days. When I finally turned it on, there were 7 missed calls from Dylan. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I drove into town. It was a small lake community, mostly seasonal folks, a few retirees, and enough storefronts to pretend at normal life. The kind of town where people wave from their porches whether they know you or not. I parked in front of the library on a whim. Inside, it smelled of paper and floor cleaner. The carpet was worn thin in the shape of a path between fiction and the checkout desk. I wandered the shelves like a tourist, touching spines, remembering the feel of work I once loved. There's a certain comfort in the alphabet. It never betrays you. That's where I met Jane. She was unpacking a box of donations and muttering about someone who had once again donated a cookbook from 1972 that smelled like soup. She had the kind of voice that made you want to keep listening, not loud, just confident in its right to exist. She looked up and smiled without forcing it. Looking for anything? I told her, maybe just out of habit, that I used to be a librarian. She asked where. I told her. And instead of changing the subject or offering a flat "that's nice," she leaned back against the desk and said, "So, you know the smell of old glue and guilt, too." We talked for an hour. About libraries, about men, about silence. I didn't tell her everything. Not about Dylan. Not yet. But I told her about Peter. And how he had known things I didn't. About how trust can feel like a gift when it comes too late. Before I left, she asked if I wanted to help out part-time. Nothing official, just restocking, helping with story hour if I felt up to it. I said I'd think about it. But I already knew I would come back. Some people speak with warmth. Jane spoke with weight. Not heavy, just solid. Like someone who'd fallen through the world and landed on her feet anyway. I wasn't looking for a friend. But it felt like maybe one had found me. The first voicemail came on a Thursday. His voice was flat, measured. "Hey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Let me know when you're back." Like I'd gone to the store and forgot my phone. Like I hadn't disappeared from his plans. I deleted it without listening to the end. The second one came 2 days later, and it was longer. "Emily and I were talking, we're both just worried. I think you're being a little impulsive. We just want to help." They always say we when they mean control. By the fourth message, the mask had started to slip. His voice was clipped. He accused me of overreacting. Said I was isolating myself, making things harder than they needed to be. That if I didn't trust him, then maybe he didn't need to keep trying. That one I saved. Not out of sentiment. Just documentation. There were texts too. "Call me. Please. Why are you doing this?" Followed by nothing for days. Then another burst. "I'm your son. Dad wouldn't want this. You're hurting me." But I didn't reply. I sat on the porch of the cabin and listened to the wind skim the lake like fingers dragging over a drumhead. That sound meant more than anything he was trying to say. It was honest. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't need to be answered. I thought about calling him once. My thumb hovered over the screen. But what would I say? He wanted a mother who'd hand over everything with a smile and a pie cooling on the counter. I was becoming someone else, someone with boundaries. And boundaries, to a man like Dylan, feel like betrayal. Peter used to say that some things don't need arguing. That the best response is sometimes no response at all. I think he would have been proud of my silence. It was a still morning. No wind, no birdsong, just the hush that comes before a storm or a reckoning. I woke before sunrise. Not from restlessness, but from decision. I'd known for weeks the urn was still in the back of the closet, tucked behind a box of old tax files. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. The weight of it was familiar, heavier than I remembered, as if grief had been adding ounces in silence. Peter never asked for a ceremony. He just said, "Toss me somewhere quiet." He meant it as a joke, but I remembered the look in his eyes when he said it, half smile, but serious underneath. So I carried him to the lake. The dock creaked underfoot, the same one we'd half built and half bullied into place one summer when our backs were younger. The water was mirror smooth, reflecting the gray sky like a sigh stretched thin. I opened the urn. The contents didn't look like anything sacred, just pale dust and fragments. But my hands shook. Not from fear. From love. I didn't speak a word. I didn't need to. I tilted the urn, and the ashes drifted out like a breath finally let go. Some clung to the air, some swirled into the lake. I imagined Peter would have found the whole thing a little ridiculous. And he would have grinned at me through it. I kept a small bit in a vial, a silver one he once gave me for holding beach glass. Not for ritual. Just to keep something close. When I walked back to the cabin, I didn't cry. I made tea. Fed the dog. Pulled out a crossword. I wasn't drowning in grief anymore. I was floating in it. Held by it, but not consumed. Loss never disappears. It just changes shape. That morning, mine finally fit in my palm. I started showing up at the library twice a week. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. There was comfort in the rhythm of shelving books, the soft thud of covers closing, the smell of dust and paper warmed by sun through high windows. I wasn't trying to rebuild the past. I was doing something new. Something mine. Jane always had a joke ready. Always smelled faintly of peppermint and ink. She never asked too much, but she always noticed when I looked tired. One afternoon, she brought in a spare chair for my corner. "Looks like you're staying a while," she said, and I realized I was. I also adopted a dog, if you could call it that. More like he adopted me. A wiry mutt with lopsided ears who showed up near the cabin and refused to leave. I named him Booker. He followed me to the mailbox, waited at the porch, curled up at my feet while I read. I didn't answer Dylan's messages anymore. He sent one more, weeks after the last, a simple line. Are you okay? That time, I almost responded. Not out of guilt, just habit. But I didn't. Because I finally understood that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for my peace. Peter once told me, starting over doesn't mean going backward. It means walking away without needing to slam the door. I didn't slam mine. I just let it close behind me, soft and final. Some mornings, I still wake up expecting to feel that old ache of absence, of guilt, of who I should have been. But now it's quieter, softer. And when I walk to the lake with Booker trotting beside me, I don't feel unfinished. I feel like I've arrived at the part of the story where I finally get to write the ending. And for once, I'm writing it for me. The snow came early this year. By mid-November, the lake was rimmed with frost, and the pines stood stoic under white. I watched it fall one morning from the cabin window, soft, steady, without sound. A quiet that reminded me of the life I'd left behind. Not in regret, but in relief. Jane gave me a key to the library. You're official now, she said with a wink. I laughed. It had been a long time since I'd laughed like that. Not polite, not reserved, but from somewhere in my chest. I saw myself clearly now, in ways I hadn't for decades. Not just someone's wife. Not someone's mother. Just Margaret. The woman who liked cold tea, old books, long silences, and her stubborn dog who stole socks and barked at pine cones. I hadn't blocked Dylan's number. I didn't need to. Silence has its own kind of shape, stronger than fences, more dignified than yelling. It's not punishment. It's a boundary. And sometimes, it's the most powerful thing you can give someone who only ever listened to noise. I hadn't said no that day at dinner. I didn't scream when he showed up with the papers. I didn't beg, didn't accuse, didn't lecture. I simply didn't sign. And that was enough. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop explaining why you deserve to be treated with respect. Sometimes you just stand up quietly and walk away. I left the photo of Dylan on the bookshelf at home, behind a row of gardening books I never read. Maybe one day I'll pull it out. Or maybe I won't. That morning, as snow gathered on the pine needles, I took Booker to the lake one last time before the freeze. The dock was slippery, but we made it to the end. I looked out across the gray water, then closed my eyes and breathed in the cold, whole, and unafraid. And in that breath, there was no pain, no grief, no need to justify anything to anyone, just silence. And for the first time in my life, it felt like home.